With the housekeeping. Welcome committee members, liaisons, and members of the public to the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission Law School Fellowship Grants Committee meeting. Thank you for joining us. We're using Zoom with the goal to foster a more inclusive environment and effective meeting. If you would like to comment during the meeting, please use the raised hand feature. Please utilize this tool to virtually indicate that you would like to speak in order to help the chair facilitate the discussion. A friendly reminder that this is a video conference and to please be aware of your surroundings behind you. All LSTFC and committee meetings will be recorded and posted to the State Bar website. Zoom captioning is available. To enable, select Live Transcript at the bottom of your Zoom screen, then select Enable Auto Transcription. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll call our meeting to order.
Would you like me to take the roll?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. Coleman?
Here.
Escobedo? Rosie?
Here.
Campbell?
Here.
We have a quorum. And I also just want to acknowledge Laura Brown from the Judicial Council is here with us. And then on the staff side, myself, Lauren, and Colleen and Shannon.
Okay. Great, welcome everyone. Do we have any public comments?
Yes, we have one public comment. I am promoting them to talk.
Okay.
Joshua, I think you should be able to unmute yourself. Oh, there you go.
Okay, thank you. Yes, this is Joshua Hirsch. I'm the Director of Grants at Public Counsel. And I just wanted to apologize again for submitting Public Counsel's application late and assure you that we have a plan in place to ensure that we do not miss another email. And I also want to assure you that Public Counsel is not a habitual offender. I believe we've only been late one other time in my 12 years at Public Counsel. And on that occasion, we were only late by 1 minute. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hirsch. All right. Now, shall we move to the calibration?
Actually, we'll have the, is it okay if we look at the action on late applications first? Oh, I'm sorry. Approval of minutes. Approval of minutes.
Approval of minutes, yes. Can we get a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move.
Second? I'll second. Okay. Can we do a roll call?
Yep. Coleman?
Yes.
Escobedo? Rosie?
Yes.
Campbell?
Yes.
Okay. Motion carries.
Okay. So would you like to proceed to the applications?
Action on late applications, is that okay?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to just share my screen. Okay, so this agenda item is related to action on late submitted 2024 grant applications for the Legal Aid Leaders Fellowship Grants. Just a bit of background for the committee. We released applications on September 11th, and applications were due on October 10th at 5 p.m. We received 34 applications by the October 10th deadline. There were 2 organizations that submitted late applications. Public Counsel contacted staff on October 12th and then submitted their application by October 19th. Legal Assistance to the Elderly contacted staff on October 18th and then submitted their application by October 25th. In addition to the late applications, staff also requested a statement from both of those organizations as to the reasons for their lateness, and that is included in your meeting materials. Just a bit of additional information that was also in the agenda item. We had 34 applications that submitted timely that requested $1.6 million to fund 170 law students. And then in total, there were 36 applications submitted requesting more than $2 million to fund 207 law students for this summer. State Bar Rule 3.680F is a newly enacted rule. It just became effective July 1st this year and provides guidance on how to treat late submissions. As you can see in the rule, staff are allowed to accept late submissions up to 1 business day. This accommodates most technical or administrative issues like the ones Mr. Hirsch referred to earlier. Most of our applications, if they are late due to a technical or administrative issue, is usually minutes late. However, neither of our late applicants cited to a technical or administrative issue. Instead, they both described staffing resource issues as a reason for their late applications. As I noted, attachment A has their statement for their lateness. And Rule 3.680F also provides some factors that the committee can take into account in determining whether to accept with conditions or reject application materials. And they're listed here 1 through 5. Number 5, the number of late application or reporting submissions made by the applicant in the preceding 3 years. We did do a sweep of both of the organizations, and there were late applications due to technical issues, as well as for legal assistance for the elderly, some late quarterly reports submitted, but nothing that arose to a level of concern for staff. Considerations that were discussed in this situation include the impact on the organization's ability to compensate summer law students without this funding. Staff acknowledges it's likely that the inability to submit these applications will mean that these organizations may not be able to compensate their law students this summer. Legal assistance to the elderly noted that in their explanation. Staff also considered fairness to the applicants who were able to submit timely and who may also likely face similar staffing resource issues. Staff also discussed the impact of accepting late applications, which could lead to future late submissions for this grant. The Legal Aid Leaders Fellowship Grant is a competitive and discretionary grant, and as I noted in the background, it is oversubscribed with requests far outpacing availability of funds. And staff felt strongly that if the situation were different, if, for example, we had unlimited funds or more than enough funds to fund all of our applicants, the recommendation might be different. But we did want to note that for the committee. My next slide is the proposed resolution, but I'm happy to answer any questions there might be.
Elizabeth, I have a question, and it may be something that Vanetta can answer better, but COAF doesn't generally do this kind of work, so I don't know how often the commission receives late grant applications and how often late submissions are actually accepted.
I can answer that. We do receive a fair number of late applications. Typically, they're a technical issue. So there's an issue with the grants management system where, it had to reload. And so they didn't quite make it in by 5 p.m. So usually a late submission is minutes late. Like Mr. Hirsch noted earlier, they had submitted a late application previously and it was by 1 minute. And so that's much more typical in terms of late applications.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, the two that were mentioned, the delay is significant. You know, it's in terms of the complete application, it's several days. And the fact that others have submitted on time, and that also, given the amount of awards available, right, additional applications may have an adverse impact on those who have applied on time. So.
I see Novella, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, is one of the considerations fairness to potential applicants that did not submit? Like, I'm wondering if everyone knows about the late application rule, or if there's a chance that other organizations would have potentially submitted late if they had the time, but don't know about the rule, and so they didn't submit at all.
That's a interesting question, Novella. I think with all of the new rules that have been implemented recently, most recently July 1st, we had a set of rules related to grants administration go into effect. And so we do notify the grantees of these new rules. In the past, if there were late applications, there wasn't a rule, so staff would always refer it to the committee for their determination.
Okay.
So I actually heard Novella's question differently. Maybe did that actually answer your question, Novella? Because I actually, and if it didn't, maybe it raised a question for me, and that is that, you know, were we to grant late applications, I think it actually I think it has a negative impact on the folks who didn't submit because they didn't think they could submit because it was late.
Oh.
So, that's actually, or maybe that's not what Novella meant, but that's something that it made me think of is that we didn't maybe advertise everyone can apply late or something to that.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering too.
Okay. So yeah.
I think that actually, yeah, no, I thank you. I think that's a good point, Novella. Thank you for raising that.
Can I just add, I mean, this is our second year with the fellowships, and actually the application process went out far earlier than than it did last year. So there was more opportunity to, review in advance and consider in advance and, and submit, on time, which ultimately gives the agencies more opportunity for their recruitment. So that was a factor that was, built in as well. So I think, again, that additional, the timeliness is a benefit to all involved, I think.
I have another question. For the organizations that submitted late, had they already picked their law students?
I don't believe they have.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns?
Okay, so I will advance the slide to the proposed resolution.
Okay. All right, can we move for a roll call?
Is there a motion?
I'll move to accept the proposed resolution as written.
I'll second.
I'll take the roll. Coleman?
Approve.
Escobedo? Rosie?
Approve.
Campbell?
Approve.
The motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, so the next step is, thank you for that. Next, we're going to move to the calibration.
Okay, yes. Yes, so before we begin calibration, I want to remind everyone about our application review and scoring process. So there are 2 review teams composed of committee members and State Bar staff members. The State Bar staff members review every application and hold internal calibration sessions before meeting with each review team. And each review team is given approximately 1/2 of the applications to review, score, and calibrate. The goal of calibration is to ensure consistency in scoring so that one scorer or review team does not unfairly advantage or disadvantage the organizations in its set of applications. Each review team has already had a separate calibration session for the first 3 applications that we will review today. Today's goal is to come to a consensus on how to score the application categories and on the appropriate scores for the applications from Casa Cornelia Law Center, Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, and Impact Fund. And then I'm going to share my screen with our spreadsheet that shows everyone's scores for each of those organizations. And what I've done is highlighted those scores that a minority of the group has elected, just to give us a starting point of what categories that we should discuss today. And so I don't know if Efrain is attending yet in the meeting yet.
I don't see him.
Okay, so maybe we can start with the supervision category for Casa Cornelia Law Center. I would like to invite a member of Team 1 to talk about what made this response, what warranted and exceeds score for Casa Cornelia's supervision response. Also, I would like to invite Kristen from Team 2 to say why she gave it a meets response.
Okay, well, I'm going to start. I think for the Casa Cornelia Law Center, I thought that the description around supervision was actually very thorough, and they indicated the not just all the quality, but the commitment of time to the law students and the level of service that would be provided. And I thought that it, it exceeded what we would normally require. That's why I gave it a 14.
Okay. And would Kristen or Novella like to comment on this one response category?
I can if Novella wants to go first, but
go ahead.
Okay. I think for Ephraim and I, or maybe I'll just speak for me since he's not here. I agree with what Vanetta said, that it was a detailed description. I think for me, the concern and why I didn't give it a 14 was because the description says a senior attorney on staff who has experience. And that would be the supervisor. And I don't know who that person is, and I don't know how experienced they are. And for the ones that we did give 14 on, we knew who that supervisor was. We were able to determine how experienced they actually were. And a senior attorney on staff could be somebody with 3 to 5 years versus somebody with 15 to 20 years. And so without knowing more, I just, I didn't feel comfortable saying that it met the highest level, because I couldn't evaluate who that senior attorney was or what that person's experience was. So that was what it was for me. And it's just that I didn't have that level of detail that I had in others. So.
Okay. And Novella, would you like to comment at all?
I agree with both comments. I think I also noted that the supervision was about like the training aspect of the fellow, but also to supervise the work product. So the part about doing a careful review before using it, I thought that was a good level of supervision. And then I also noted that the organization has clear boundaries and control over the fellows' interaction with clients, which seems important in this context, given the potential like trauma that the clients have experienced. So I thought paying special attention to that was good as well.
Okay. Okay, so now I'll ask if any of the committee members feel persuaded to change their score.
Yeah, I would feel comfortable going to to 10. I mean, I think that the expectation is that they can perform the work, but not having I can see we're not having the specific detail of the person providing that supervision would make a difference. So I would feel comfortable going down to a 10.
Okay. Great. And would any other committee member like to change their scores?
I will stay as is. I think I agree that it's important that the supervisor have that experience. I think sometimes it can be hard for nonprofits to plan far out in advance who will be around by the time like a fellow comes on board, whether it's for a summer or a year.
Okay. Okay. So then I think we can go ahead and move on to the next organization. This next one is LAFLA. It appears that the committee was fairly consistent except for the organizational benefit category. So would anyone from Review Team 1 like to comment on why they gave it the exceed score? Or would Kristen from Review Team 2 comment on why she gave it a meet score?
Well, I'd be happy to start off. I think that again with this particular program, I thought the organizational benefit was significant, both in terms of the populations to be served, which are vulnerable, underserved populations, and the commitment, both the commitment to look at this service holistically. And so it took into consideration both the community and also meeting those needs through the recruitment of the law students. So I just thought that their organizational benefit in the long run was really strong for both in terms of language justice and the Black Health Initiative. So that's why I rated them highly.
I agree with that. I think what also pushed me towards the exceeding standards is that the application talked about the fellows being a part of the pipeline for the organization's staff attorneys and provided some data points on that. So given the overall purpose of the funding of like creating attorneys who in their career would serve indigent clients, I thought that was a good point to include.
So again, I'll just speak for me because Ephraim's not here. So you know, I gave the impact a 14 because I think that the work actually is really important. And I liked what they had to say to Novella's point about the pipeline. And so that's why, because that was part of their impact, that's why I gave them a 14. I think for me on the benefit to the organization itself, in that section, I felt like there was a lot of talk about the projects themselves, both the Language Justice Project and the Black Health Initiative projects, but I couldn't really get a sense from the description what exactly the fellows would be doing. And I'm looking at my notes, and I actually wrote in the margin, like, what does that mean? When you say that they're going to conduct language rights advocacy on behalf of clients, I wasn't sure what that meant. And I understood that, what the program does. I just didn't have a very good sense of the impact that the fellow was going to make, because it just wasn't clear to me what they were going to do. It was slightly more convincing when they talked about the Black Health Initiative, because it said they were going to intake and fact gathering and things like that. But with regard to the language justice, I felt like I just didn't know what they were going to do. And so I couldn't be sure what the impact was going to be if I wasn't sure what they were doing.
Okay. So do any of the committee members feel persuaded to change their scores at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll keep my score here. I mean, it just seems like the nature of the work, I agree about the impact and the benefit overall. I just think it's significant, particularly given the opportunity for the law students to be involved in this, this type of work. I think I like to stay at 14.
I can be compelled to go up to a 14. With the caveats that I mentioned, and I just thought they could have done a better job. But so I can be compelled.
Okay, so you would like to change it to a 14?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm wondering if I'm just looking at the description of the prompt for the organizational benefit part, because I heard Judge Kristen say a lot impact in her response, and I was thinking of that as corresponding to the first one, or the one that's entitled impact. So now I'm wondering if I clearly understand what it means by the impact of posting law fellows on the applicant's work.
So I think the first category impact is really about the work that the law student would be doing. And then the second question related to organizational impact is the benefit of hosting a law student on the organization. So I think we've read in applications about, developing their pipeline or helping them to serve more clients, or for this application in particular, the law fellows help with outreach efforts, and expand their ability to provide services and also serve as a pipeline.
Okay, thanks.
So Novella, just to confirm, are you staying at 14?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, well, we can move on to Impact Fund. For the supervision category, Team 1 gave Impact Fund a 14. Team 2 gave them a 10. Would someone from Team 1 like to comment on why they felt the supervision response for Impact Fund warranted an exceed score?
I'm sure I can go ahead. I think I was on the caliber of the supervision as described was very thorough. I think the caliber of the supervisors and the service they would provide to the law students was, well described. I think that also there was a commitment established to, overseeing the work, as opposed to those in the past would just say like, yes, they will be supervised. I think they were able to kind of, give more qualitative effort to what they would actually do. So from that vantage point, I thought it kind of exceeded beyond what we would expect one to do in terms of supervision.
I agree with that. I think based on the prior applications, I could see if the other team scored this lower because who the supervisor is going to be isn't determined yet.
Novella is wise in her. Yeah, I mean, I again, I won't speak for Ephraim, but we had a long conversation about this, because and in all candor, I appreciated that they told us the truth, right? They didn't have to say our executive director, of many years is stepping down. And I think for us, it was the fact that, so the executive director is stepping down, and the person who is in charge of training becomes the ED. And so it's clear that we don't know who that new person is going to be. And so it was hard for us to evaluate the quality of the supervision, because I am sure that the new executive director will not be able to do both jobs. And so they'll need to report to, they'll need to hire somebody, and they've yet to hire somebody. But that, and what it says is that person will have years of experience in supervision and litigation. But that, again, as Novella very astutely pointed out, gave us pause, not because we don't think they're going to hire somebody that's well qualified, but because we just don't know who that person is. And so it's hard to say that person is going to be as experienced as the person that was there before. If all things were the same, and nobody was leaving, I would have rated it a 14, but because we don't know, we rated it a 10 because we just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a really good point. On one hand, with the other application, they didn't specify the range of experience, right?
We were trying to be consistent.
Exactly. No, I can see that. In this one, we know the quality of the providers, but obviously they're going through a transition, staffing transition, and that will, that's going to impact whatever they're able to provide. Presuming that they're going to obviously use, due diligence and all those, those types of things. So I think for consistency, and it's, a great point. I appreciate their honesty for sure.
Right. I mean,
but just to be on the caution. Yeah, I would go down to 10 for that one.
Okay.
Supervision. That's a good point. Thank you.
Okay. And then Novella, would you like to stay at 14?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, then I think the next one is recruitment, where Novella, you are at 14, exceeds. So does anyone want to comment on why they scored meets or exceeds for recruitment?
Yeah, I'll start. I remember this one well. They are recruiting from the major law schools in the Bay Area, which are great, but they didn't. That just seemed that was the standard approach, and they weren't going above and beyond in terms of accessing any other institutions of learning and those representing underserved populations. Like HBSUs or other types of programs. So for that reason, I gave them a 10.
And I will just piggyback that's exactly what I think I may have even said, because one of the batches of folks, and I can't remember if it was Legal Aid of LA or actually specifically mentioned recruiting, outside of California and to HBCUs. And but yeah, I felt like they were sort of doing the exact thing we would expect, which is you're going to go to a public interest career fair, and you're going to recruit from the schools that are geographically around you, but not do, to Vanetta's point, slightly more than that. Right. And so, I felt like that's exactly where you needed to be, where we would expect people to be, but not at the you went above and beyond level.
Okay.
I remember being torn between the two scoring categories, the one that everyone got and then the one that I landed on for this one. I think one regarding the law school recruitment is that I wasn't sure how much to make of the recruitment to California schools versus schools outside of California. So obviously, there's not like a plethora of HBCUs to recruit at in California. So I remember from last time we were talking about organizations selecting candidates who had ties to California because we wanted to increase the number of lawyers who serve indigent persons in California. So that was like one aspect where I was just like, okay, do I give them like full credit because they're making the most of what they can with California's pool of law schools, or compare it to the other application that had like a more targeted effort to recruit schools that had more diverse populations. And then the other thing that I noticed from this one that was different from the other applications is that it actually talked about the criteria for assessing candidates or gauging candidates' interest in pursuing a legal career to serve indigent persons. And I don't think the other applications did that. So I wasn't sure if it like a 14 would be an application that hits all of the bullet points in the consider prompt, or if it's more about like doing really good on like some of the bullet points in the considered prompt.
So Novella, to just answer that last question, the consider prompt is really, we're not requiring any of the applicants answer all of those questions, but those bullet points are there to help them answer the question, and it's really up to the committee to determine, how well an applicant has answered the question.
So does anyone feel inclined to change their response to the recruitment question? I mean, their score on the recruitment question?
I can go down to a 10.
Okay. Okay. And then moving on to our preference categories. The first one is the serves rural population question, where team 2 was at below expectations, and team 1 was at meets expectations. Does anyone want to comment on the reasoning behind their score?
Let me find that one.
Also, I just want to note, I just want to note in this situation, we did ask that the applicant go back and include the MSSA tracked information. And so this was a revised response that we received later. And I can.
Right, I remember that now. Yeah, I remember now. I'm with you now. I think we did get the revised, and I think it was basically every MSSA tracked, right? It was just a long list of everything, which I think we felt like, I think it lists every every county in California. And because the work, and so I understand their point. It's class action work, so maybe somebody in every county is touched by it. But that to me isn't the same thing as serving rural communities by actually doing the work in rural communities. And so I felt like, yes, you'll get some credit for your class action lawsuit impacting folks in every county, assuming that there's somebody in every county that fits into your class. But as far as actually serving a rural community, that to me did not seem to be the same thing as actually being in those communities and doing the work in those communities. And so and we did have a discussion about this, because when they were asked to list the counties, they listed all of them, or all the tracks, they listed all of them. So it just felt like the rural, because this is, a funding preference, that if you're going to get a funding preference for doing work in a rural community, that you ought to actually be doing the work in a rural community, as opposed to doing, global work, which is important, but also, and just touching a handful of people in every one, and some of them happen to be in rural communities. So that's what it was for me. Yeah.
I agree with that characterization. I think I just translated it onto the rubric differently, so that applicant that got a 10 would be one that is like specifically targeting the rural communities. And then I treated this one, which is doing work that includes clients in rural communities, as a 7. So I guess I guess the 3-point difference isn't that big, but I do agree, like from a principled reason, that there is a distinction between specifically focusing on rural communities versus doing statewide things that also help rural communities.
And I think for me, all good points. It's the capacity to do the work and the interest to do the work versus direct experience with doing it, right? They had the interest and the infrastructure to do it. And so from that vantage point, I figured, well, the next step would be the full implementation. And so from that vantage point, that's why I scored it as a 7. Way more aspirational.
Yeah, I just felt like it, I just think I felt like it was a reach to say that it met, sort of that meets expectations, level again, as opposed to the, 10 of you're doing, you're focused on that. Because for me, I thought, well, if it's, we were giving folks who don't touch rural, a 0. So if this is a slight step up for me, so that's why I was like, well, I can't say you're not doing it because you are,
right?
But you're not doing it at, you're doing it sort of tangentially, I guess, was how it felt to me.
The narrative does say that their active litigation includes work impacting rural communities in northeastern counties near the Oregon border and in the Central Valley. Does that give you more specificity?
No, I believe them. I'm not saying I don't believe them. I think it probably does. But, I felt like that it was more removed from if we're looking at it the 0, 4, 7, 10, that it wasn't at a 7 for me. It just wasn't like, 10 would be, rural assistance, right? Like you're there, all of it's rural. Everything you do is rural. And 7 would be like, a sort of a meets somewhere in the, half is rural and half is urban or some other percentage. But this didn't feel like that. This felt more like a 4. So, and I'm okay being an outlier. It's all right.
Well, does anyone feel
but
persuaded?
I that is sort of how I was looking at it from the standpoint of 0 to 10 is, you got credit for doing it, but maybe not at a 7. I feel like we were harsher graders now.
And Lauren, were you talking? I couldn't hear you.
Oh yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Yes, I was just asking if any committee member feels persuaded to change their score for the serves rural population question. No. Okay.
I
think we're all good.
Okay. And then last we have the serves underserved populations question. Team 2 gave it a meets score, whereas Team 1 gave it an exceed score. So would anyone like to start by describing why they scored either meets or exceeds?
I will start by saying I have no idea why I didn't give it a 10, to be totally honest with you. Because I'm looking back at my notes and I'm reading the underserved community, and it's, their class action is on Section 8 stuff. So I to be totally honest with you, I have no idea why I gave it a 7 out of 10.
Okay.
So Lauren, I'd like to change my score to a 10.
Okay, great.
And because I honestly don't know based on my notes right here. Save us all some time by just admitting I don't know.
Okay. Great. Well, yeah, does anyone else want to change their score, or it sounds like everyone's good?
Yep, okay.
Okay, great. Thank you all. I think that concludes our calibration.
Yeah, and just to note that where there's variance, we take the average. Great. And just before we move on, any questions from committee members on the rubric or definitions or anything that might need clarification before we review the rest of the sets of applications?
I'll just share, I think what I can, appreciate is going through the process for the second year, you get more, it was at least my second year, right? You get more clarity about the categories and the caliber of the applications. I mean, clearly we have the interest, which is fantastic, right? But I think the level of detail that they've described this time is is notable. And I think we're kind of striving for even more detail in kind of key areas, right? Whether it's actual parties providing supervision, right? As Kristen mentioned, or even the preferences, more detail about capacity to serve versus actual experience serving. So we're just fine tuning, that process. But I think I felt more prepared thanks to my training last year. So thanks for the collaboration.
Yeah, I agree. Having done it last year definitely helps. And then the clarification that State Bar staff provided around, the rural and the other categories is, now that this is our second time going through it, being able to explain, what each scoring category means in more detail, I think helps us.
I agree.
I remember last year that during the calibration that we were more all over the board than I think we were this year. Although the three of us on here all were on it last year, so that might also be part of why.
Right. Okay. So Elizabeth, can you describe our next steps? I know we received some emails about the process.
So for the next steps, each review team has half of the set of all applications. So I believe review team 2 has meetings. I think there might be a meeting tomorrow or the next, this week. And then so we'll review half of the set in the next meeting. And then review team 1, I believe your meeting's not until next week. Yeah, and so that we will review, we'll calibrate the half of each set in each of the subsequent meetings.
Okay. Great, thank you. Any other comments?
I have a question. When we submit our scores for the next batches, are they due the same day as the meeting, or are they due in advance of the meeting?
It would be great if you could send it to us like 5 p.m. or, the close of business the day before the meeting so we can have the spreadsheets ready for when we do meet.
I asked because I'm anticipating needing the Thanksgiving weekend to do the November 20th ones. But I can send it by 9 a.m.
Okay. Yeah, as long as it's a little bit before the meeting so that we have some time to input everything.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we can adjourn our meeting.
No, wait, one more item.
Sorry.
We have we wanted to present, Lauren will present the findings from the law student surveys. And then at our next meeting in December, Colleen will present on the grantee evaluations.
Great. So. Okay. All right. Thank you. Lauren?
Okay, yes. Do slideshow from beginning. Okay, great.
We don't see we see your notes, but not the presentation. I think you might need to switch screens.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Okay, let me stop share for a second. Okay, so let me try this one more time. Okay, are you able to see it full screen now?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, great. Thank you for your patience. So today I want to walk through some of the key data findings from the Legal Aid Leaders Fellowship surveys. These are some of the main highlights, so it's not all of the data we've collected, but some of the main findings that we wanted to just share with you today. I'm going to start by providing some background on the surveys, including their main content. Then I will show and discuss the pre-fellowship survey findings, followed by the post-fellowship survey findings, and then we will end with some key takeaways. So the 2023 cohort participated in 2 surveys, one at the start of their fellowship and one toward the end. The intent of the survey data collection was to capture participant information, which is helpful for us to understand the diversity of the cohort, for instance. And also, we want to gauge the overall impact of the program as it aims to support law students interested in pursuing a career in legal services for indigent persons. Survey findings may also influence improvements to the program for subsequent cohorts. Specifically, the 2023 RFP stated that the surveys would likely ask about the fellows' experiences and learnings at the organization. And as part of the California Change Lawyers cohort, the fellows' future career plans and the fellows' demographic information. So on this slide, you can see the list of question topics covered in the first survey, which received 100% participation. We asked for basic information about their fellowship, including their host organization, fellowship start and end dates, and total number of hours they anticipated working. We also asked demographic and other individual characteristic questions. Then we asked about their interests, including their career interests and the areas of law, skills, and activities of interest. On the slide, you can see the list of question topics covered in the second survey, which received 88% participation. It started with identifying information and basic fellowship information, including the name of the fellow supervisors. It then asks the fellows to rate the extent to which the fellowship met expectations and their levels of satisfaction with specific parts of the experience, including the supervision, support, assignments, compensation, and California Change Lawyers programming. The survey also asked about the areas of law, skills, and activities that the fellows engaged in. It included specific questions about their assessment of the California Change Lawyers programming. It also asked fellows to identify the geographic locations where they worked, their ability to work with a legal aid organization if they had not received funding, and their interest in a public interest law career following the fellowship. Finally, it gave them the opportunity to tell us if they would be willing to allow us to contact them in the future, as it may be helpful to hear from them directly about their experience. So now I'm going to talk about the pre-fellowship survey findings. So what we learned from the pre-fellowship survey is that we had one person responding yes to the question of, have you ever served on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces, Reserves, or National Guard? We had 6 people respond yes to, I identify as a person with a disability. I'm sorry. We have, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry. I'm so sorry for the confusion there. I hit the wrong button. Sorry. But now I'll continue. Apologies. So we had 6 people respond yes to identify as a person with a disability. And then we had 1 more than 3/4 of the cohort identify as female. 2 members of the cohort reported being non-binary, and 1 member reported being two-spirit. More than 1/3 of the cohort identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, or asexual, and the cohort was also racially diverse, with more than half identifying as people of color. Okay, so in response to the question of what is your level of interest in pursuing a career in legal services or legal aid after law school, 3/4 of the respondents indicated high or very high interest. In response to the question of what areas of the law are you most interested in learning about during the fellowship, the top 5 areas were access to justice, family domestic violence, immigration, housing, and employment. In response to the question of which skills are you most interested in developing during your fellowship, the top 5 skills were legal writing, legal research and analysis, client interaction, critical thinking or problem solving, and conflict resolution. In response to the question of what activities are you most interested in participating in during your fellowship, the top 5 activities were mentorship, substantive law training, networking, procedural law training, in-court observations, experiences and observations. And now we're going to talk about the post-fellowship survey findings. So in response to the question, has the fellowship met your expectations? 96% reported that it met, more than met, or exceeded expectations. In response to assessing the level of satisfaction with compensation and with the programming and resources, about 90% reported feeling satisfied, more than satisfied, or very satisfied for each of those categories. In response to what areas of law have they engaged in, the top 5 areas were housing, family domestic violence, immigration, access to justice, and employment. There were some respondents who indicated other areas like veterans, public benefits, civil rights, tax law. So there were those other areas as well. In response to which legal skills they developed, the top 5 legal skills were legal research and analysis, client interaction, legal writing, collaborating, critical thinking or problem solving. And the other category respondents named courtroom etiquette, community outreach, representing clients, dealing with secondhand trauma. In response to what activities they participated in, the top 5 activities were substantive law training, networking, procedural law training, mentorship, and learning about the California legal aid landscape. And then finally, we asked them the question of if they had not received state bar funding this summer, would they have been able to work for a legal aid organization? Only a small fraction provided a definitive yes response. The majority said no, and some said maybe, providing detailed explanations of what their summer could have been without the funding. So this includes working another job or taking out loans, or depending on law school fellowship funds, or simply feeling discouraged about taking the opportunity. In response to how likely they would be to recommend the fellowship to another student, 94% reported that they are likely, very likely, or extremely likely. And then and then also we asked a similar question to what we asked in the pre-fellowship survey about their level of interest in a career in legal aid. And so we were able to determine the extent to which those responses changed from the pre-survey to the post-survey, and found that 15 fellows had increased in their level of interest in a public interest law career. However, we did also find that there were 15 students reporting a decrease in interest. And I think this is just an opportunity for us to consider how to gather more information in the next survey to determine what could be the causes of those changes in the level of interest. And lastly, I just want to reiterate some key takeaways from the data. The areas of law and the legal skills that fellows reported being interested in closely overlapped with the areas of law that they worked and the skills that they developed. So for instance, the top 5 areas of law that the fellows reported being most interested in learning about are the same top 5 areas that they'd engaged in throughout their fellowship. And similarly, the top 4 legal skills and the top 4 activities that fellows reported being interested in are the same legal skills and activities in the top 5 that they had initially. So what they had initially reported, the top 4 activities that they reported being most interested in are within the top that they actually participated in. And so this close alignment of the fellows' interests and their actual experience is another good indicator of the fellowship being beneficial to the participants. Like I said about earlier about fellows being able to have worked at a legal aid organization without funding, only a minority reported yes, that they would have been able to. And I think this finding shows how the State Bar's funding makes a critical difference in the opportunities and experiences available to attorneys, to future attorneys interested in building legal aid careers. And so at this time, I'll take any questions.
Lauren, thank you for the presentation. I know it, first of all, speaks positively to the importance of the funding, right? As an incentive for the, the summer internship programs. I just had one question and like a comment. In terms of the survey response, there was 100%, with the pre-test and 88% with the post-test, like 10 folks who didn't respond. Can you talk about how the dissemination of that survey? I was wondering if what we might be able to do to just increase it a little bit more.
Right. So I think this time around, the survey was released, toward the end of the summer when some of the law students had already finished their time with their organizations. And so contacting them after they had finished their fellowships essentially posed a little bit of a challenge trying to get a hold of them versus when we first gave them the survey, they were all at their organizations and we all had direct contact to them and their email addresses at their organizations. So I think that was a bit of a challenge in trying to capture their responses after they had already left.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's an understandable consideration. So maybe, focus on time, timeline in the future. The other thing was just a comment. We've been talking about the, impact, organizational benefit, all different categories, and it seems like from the standpoint of training, that the feedback from the law students in terms of the training that they received, right, might be something that we can consider factoring into our next, iteration of the application, right? Types of trainings, for example, X, Y, and Z, since we have better clarity on, what that means. But yeah, I think the feedback was phenomenal. Thank you for that. Great work.
Yeah. And I see Kristen's hand.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions, and the first one is, do the organizations themselves see the responses from their fellows?
No, we have not provided individual response information to the organizations.
Okay, and we're not planning to. We're just giving a global.
Right, just a summary. We don't disclose what the fellows reported.
Okay, and when next time around, is it possible for us to ask, if your score, if your likelihood went up or went down, for what reason? Because it would be interesting to know the why behind the.
Yes, yeah, I definitely agree that we should ask that question to gather more information about the change. Yes.
And I also thought it was really interesting. The percentages of the fellows similarly tracks to the percentage of people in the profession who engage in public interest law as well. I think when we did the attorney surveys, we see that women are overrepresented, people of color are overrepresented. It, you know, maybe isn't surprising that it tracks the same way for law students.
Yeah, Kristen, that's a good point. Just a question, how might that impact recruitment?
And that's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, one piece of information that we don't have is what summer law clerks look like at many of these organizations before we provided this funding.
Yeah.
Because that, I mean, we there's no way for us to gather that information, but I think
Right.
that would be interesting to see if how the law clerk cohort looks with funding and without funding, but unfortunately that's not data we can compare. But yeah, Kristen, that is a good, interesting observation that you have there.
The other question I had, do we have to submit, or does the commission have to submit like an annual report to the state? Okay.
No, there's no requirement that a report be submitted to the legislature related to this, but this funding is time limit. The statute for this to direct this funding towards this purpose is limited to 2 years, and so we do hope to gather information to provide to the legislature so that they will continue directing the funding in this way.
Okay, they can reappropriate in 2 years. For longer should they deem it necessary. So yeah, I mean the feedback would be really important to do that. So. All right. Well, looks like many law students are benefiting from this, this summer program, which is great. I think it exceeds the expectation, right? that we're hoping for. So, good effort on everybody's part.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right. Well, move to adjourn our meeting.
Need a motion for that?
No, we can.
Okay.
You can just adjourn the meeting, Vanetta.
Okay, meeting adjourned. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.